Hello friends, welcome to the world of science fiction and forgotten words, Alien Universe. Don't forget to like, subscribe and never miss a new stories and movies from this channel. Thank you.
The aliens did not ask for a fleet. They did not ask for a general. They did not even ask for Earth's best soldier. They asked for one thing and one thing only. Show us your deadliest sniper. Every screen in the command hall went silent. After that, no one moved. No one spoke. The air itself felt tight, like the whole room was holding its breath. The alien delegation stood in a line of silver armor and pale faces, calm and proud, as if they had already decided what they would. See, they expected a legend in black uniform, a cold-eyed killer, a human weapon built only for war. Instead, Commander Rains smiled. It was not a nervous smile. It was not a polite smile. It was the kind of smile that made people uneasy, because it meant he knew something no one else did. Pick any civilian, he said. For a moment, even the aliens forgot how to react. My name is Sci-Fi, Tactical Observer, 3rd Wing, Imperial Recon Division. I had crossed 2 star systems expecting to study a young species with noisy weapons, emotional leaders, and messy military habits. That was what the report said about humans. Undisciplined, improvised, brave, yes, but reckless. Dangerous in crowds, not in precision. Their war record was short. Their technology was uneven. Their culture looked soft from the outside. Too much music, too much laughter, too much attachment to useless things. And yet their commander had just answered a formal military challenge by offering us civilians. At first, I thought it was an insult. My superior, High Marshal Kareth, clearly thought the same. His upper lip tightened, and the thin skin at his throat darkened with anger. Commander, he said, his voice hard and flat, we came to witness the finest long-range killer your world can produce. Do not mistake our request for a joke. Rains folded his hands behind his back. He was older than most human officers. I had seen, broad in the shoulders, with gray at his temples, and a face carved by weather, stress, and too many hard decisions. I'm not joking, he said. You asked for our deadliest sniper. I'm telling you, you don't need a uniform for that. The others in my delegation shifted with quiet annoyance. One of them, Tovin, gave a low laugh under his breath. Primitive arrogance, he muttered in our language. They always confuse confidence with ability. I almost agreed, because the human officers in the room were not laughing. That was the first thing that bothered me. None of them smiled. None of them looked amused, embarrassed, or defensive. They looked still, too still, like people standing near the edge of a story they had seen before, one that never ended well. Kareth stepped closer. Very well. Bring U.S. one of these civilians. Commander Rains nodded at once, as if this had been expected from the beginning. I already have one in mind. The transport took us away from the military district, away from the sharp towers, radar spines, landing bays, and defense walls. We flew low over a dry red plain where old machines lay half buried in dust. Broken roads crossed the land like scars. Rusted hulls, shattered drones, and old concrete bunkers passed beneath us in silence. I kept waiting for the transport to turn toward a hidden training center or a black site weapons range. It never did. Instead, it descended toward a dead little town at the edge of nowhere. The place looked forgotten. Wind pushed dust through empty streets. Faded signs hung from leaning buildings. Most of the shops were closed. A water tower stood crooked against the pale sky. It did not look like the home of a warrior. It looked like the kind of place war had stepped on and never bothered to remember. The transport landed beside a long metal garage with one broken light above the door. Commander Rains stood and gestured outside. Here we are. Tovin stared at him. This is your answer? Rains did not reply. We stepped out into heat, dust, and the smell of oil. Somewhere inside the garage, metal struck metal. A slow, steady sound. Not hurried, not nervous. Just work. Then I saw him. He was under an old ground truck with half his body hidden beneath the frame. His boots stuck out first, Then one leg shifted, then the sound of a wrench stopped. A moment later, the man slid out on his back and sat up. He was younger than I expected. Not young, but not old. Maybe mid-30s by human standards. Dark hair, thin face, grease on both hands, a smear of black oil across one cheek. He wore a faded work shirt with the sleeves rolled up and no sign of rank, no military insignia, no weapon in sight. He looked at the commander, then at us, and his expression changed only slightly. That slight change disturbed me more than any dramatic reaction could have. He did not look surprised. "Elias," Commander Rains said, "need a favor." The mechanic stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "That kind of favor?" "Yeah." He looked past Rains and studied us one by one. His eyes stopped on me for less than a second, but in that second, I felt something cold pass through me. Not hatred, not fear, recognition, maybe, or calculation. Then it was gone. "I'm busy," he said. Kareth let out a sharp breath through his teeth. "This is the human answer? A laborer?" "Mechanic," the man corrected quietly. Tovin laughed openly this time. "Of course he is." But the mechanic did not react to the mockery. He turned and set his wrench down with careful precision, like a man who did not waste movement. Then he reached for a cup of dark liquid sitting on a workbench and drank from it. Coffee. Burned, bitter, human. I had smelled it in every outpost since we arrived. Commander Rains took a step nearer. "They want to see what a human sniper looks like." The mechanic gave a tired little nod, as if he had heard something. "Boring rather than dangerous." "And you brought them to me." "I did." A long silence followed. The wind pushed dust through the doorway. Somewhere outside, a loose sign tapped against metal. I looked around the garage. Engine parts, tires, shelves of tools, scrap metal, a radio playing low static, nothing else, no rifle case, no ammunition, no display of hidden force. It was absurd. Then the mechanic asked the question that changed the room. "Are they asking because they're curious?" he said, "or because they're planning something?" No one answered immediately, and that was when my doubt began. Because that was not the question of a harmless man. That was the question of someone who understood exactly why predators asked to see teeth. High, Marshal Kareth drew himself up. "Human civilian, you speak out of place." The mechanic looked at him without blinking. "Do I?" Rain said nothing. He was watching the exchange too carefully. Too calmly. Kareth moved closer, anger sharpening his voice. "You stand before an imperial delegation. We came in respect. We asked for proof of human precision warfare. Your commander brings us to a repair garage in a ruined settlement and offers us a grease-stained worker. Explain why I should not take this as mockery." The mechanic lowered the coffee cup. When he spoke again, his tone stayed soft, but the whole garage seemed to grow smaller around his voice. "Because if he had brought you the one still in uniform," he said, "you would have gone back to your ships and left orbit before sunset." No one laughed, not even to Vandot, and in that silence, I felt the first real crack appear in everything I thought I knew about humans. The mechanic turned toward the back wall, where a stained canvas sheet hung over something long and narrow. He stood there for a second without touching it. His shoulders looked heavy, like a man carrying years he never put down. When he finally spoke, he did not look at us. "You should have asked for a soldier," he said. "Civilians are harder to measure." Then he pulled the canvas down. Under it was a rifle, not a display piece, not ceremonial, not polished for pride. It was old, dark, worn at the grip, and stock from long use. Parts of it had been repaired by hand. The scope was newer than the body. The sling had been stitched twice. It looked like a machine rebuilt. Too many times because no one trusted anything else. The moment I saw it, my skin went cold, because I had seen that shape before, not in person. In archived battle footage. In blurred recon fragments from the final hours of the border war. In reports so restricted that even my rank had only allowed partial access. One line came back to me at once. Single hostile marksman. Human. Position unknown. I stared at the weapon, then at the mechanic, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, I stopped seeing a worker in a broken town. I started seeing a ghost, and the worst part was this. I was suddenly afraid that Commander Rains had told the truth. This really might be what an ordinary human looked like. The garage felt different the moment the radio went silent. Not louder, not more tense, just heavier. The wind outside kept pushing dust across the empty street, but inside the building everything had slowed. Every movement felt deliberate now, like the world itself had shifted into another gear. Commander Rains still held the radio in his hand. Unidentified ships, High Marshal Kareth repeated slowly. How many? The radio crackled again. 8 confirmed vessels. Possibly more behind them. They just exited jump. Tovin's posture stiffened. Those are not ours, he said quickly. Kareth turned sharply toward him. You're certain? Yes, our fleet uses a different signature. Those ships aren't consortium. Rains exhaled slowly. Great. The mechanic was already moving. Elias lifted the rifle again and checked the chamber with calm efficiency. He opened a metal toolbox and pulled out a small case of ammunition. Each round slid neatly into place with soft metallic clicks. No panic, no rush. Just preparation. I watched him carefully. You expected this, I said. Elias glanced at me briefly. No. Then why are you not surprised? He shrugged. Because it always happens eventually. Kareth stepped forward. You believe these ships are hostile. That's usually why unknown fleets arrive unannounced, Elias replied. The radio hissed again. Commander, they're ignoring contact requests. Rains rubbed his forehead. That answers that. Tovin looked uneasy now. If those ships are not ours, then whose are they? No one answered immediately, but I already knew the answer. There was only one faction in this region that still used that kind of silent entry pattern. The same faction that had fought humanity years ago. The same war buried in sealed archives. I felt the realization hit like cold water. They're remnants, I said quietly. Kareth turned toward me. Remnants of what? I swallowed. The border war. The garage fell silent again. Commander Rains looked at Elias. The mechanic simply nodded once. Thought so. Kareth's voice dropped lower. You are saying the enemy that attacked your world before has returned? Looks that way, Rains replied. Tovin shook his head. That war ended 12 years ago. Elias finished loading the rifle and stood up. Wars don't end, he said quietly. They just take breaks. Outside, a low rumble rolled across the sky. We all turned toward the open garage door. Far above the horizon, faint streaks of fire began appearing in the atmosphere. Ships entering orbit. The radio burst alive again. Commander, orbital defense stations are powering up. Another voice cut in. We're detecting weapons charging on the unknown vessels. Rains grabbed the radio again. All units prepare defensive protocols. More voices shouted across the channel. Civilian evacuation warnings issued. Defense grid activating. The entire colony was waking up. Alarms began echoing faintly across the distant settlement. Sirens. Doors slamming. Vehicles starting. Panic spreading. Kareth turned toward the commander. You must mobilize your military immediately. Rains nodded. Already happening. Then the marshal asked the question none of us had expected. How long until your fleet arrives? Rains looked at him. We don't have a fleet. In orbit right now. The alien delegation stared at him. Tovin blinked. You are undefeated? Not exactly. Rains gestured toward Elias. We've got civilians. For the first time since landing on Earth, High Marshal Kareth looked genuinely disturbed. This is not a situation for humor. I'm not joking. Outside, the sky flashed faintly as distant orbital weapons began firing. A deep vibration rolled through the ground. The war had already started. Elias stepped toward the door and scanned the sky. His eyes moved slowly, calculating distances. Then he spoke. How many ships again? Rains checked the radio readout. 8 confirmed. The mechanic nodded once. Same pattern as before? Kareth heard that. Before? Elias slung the rifle over his shoulder. The first invasion. Tovin frowned. You said that war ended. Elias looked back at him. It did. How? The mechanic paused. Then he gave a small, humorless smile. Badly. The radio screamed again. Commander! One enemy ship has entered low orbit. Another voice shouted over it. Ground strike signatures detected. The sky suddenly roared. Something tore through the clouds far above. A massive alien dropship punched into the atmosphere, trailing fire and smoke as it descended toward the desert plain beyond the town. Dust blasted across the ground when it hit. The shock wave rattled every loose piece of metal in the garage. The invasion had arrived. Kareth stepped forward. You cannot stop that with a single rifle. Elias watched the smoke rising from the distant landing site. You're right. He opened the truck door and reached inside. When he stepped back out, he carried a small black case. The moment he set it on the workbench and opened it, my breath caught. Inside were pieces of equipment far more advanced than the old rifle. Targeting optics, signal scramblers, range amplifiers. Military grade, carefully maintained, carefully hidden. Kareth's eyes widened. You said you were a civilian. Elias began attaching the equipment to the rifle with practiced movements. I am, and explain this. The mechanic finished locking the scope into place. Then he looked up. I fix engines, he said. But sometimes... He checked the rifle's balance one last time. Old jobs come back. Commander Rains stepped closer. You ready? Elias glanced toward the horizon, where the alien dropship sat like a dark mountain in the desert. Not really. He chambered around, but I guess I'll manage. Kareth's voice dropped into a whisper. You cannot fight an invasion force alone. Elias slung the rifle across his back. Then he said the sentence that made every alien in the room uneasy. I'm not alone. Tovin frowned. There is no army here. Elias walked toward the garage door. As he stepped into the dusty street, he gestured toward the town. You see mechanics. He nodded toward a nearby building. You see shop owners. He pointed toward the far road. You see farmers. Then he looked back at us. What I see, he said quietly, are people who remember the last time someone tried this. A truck engine roared to life somewhere. Down the street. Then another. Then another. Doors opened across the settlement. Lights flickered on. Figures stepped outside carrying long metal cases. From rooftops, from garages, from houses. One by one. Rifles appeared. Hundreds of them. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The town we had believed to be peaceful was quietly arming itself. Commander Rains watched the scene calmly. Then he looked at the alien delegation. You asked to see humanity's deadliest sniper. He nodded toward the mechanic walking into the dust. You're about to see why we don't usually show them. The garage stayed quiet after the rifle appeared. No dramatic movement. No loud reaction. Just silence spreading slowly through the room. Like cold air leaking through a cracked door. High, Marshal Kareth stared at the weapon for a long moment. His expression did not change, but I could see the tension in his posture. Even he understood that this was no ordinary tool. Still, pride forced him to speak. This, he said slowly, is your proof? A worn projectile weapon carried by a repair worker? The mechanic Elias, the commander had called him, picked up the rifle with both hands. Not carefully, not dramatically. Just naturally, the way someone might lift a familiar instrument. He checked the bolt, then glanced through the scope for half a second before lowering it again. It still works, he said. Tovin snorted. That was not the question. Elias leaned the rifle against the workbench and wiped his hands again. The grease stains refused to disappear completely. He seemed more interested in the rag than in the aliens watching him. Commander Rains finally stepped forward. Let's not waste time, he said. You wanted to see a sniper. You're about to. Kareth folded his arms behind his back. Very well. Demonstrate. Elias looked toward the open garage door. Beyond it, the dry plain stretched far into the distance. Wind rolled across the empty land, pushing small clouds of dust along the broken road. "What's the target?" Elias asked. One of the alien technicians activated a small hovering drone. The device flew outward and projected a glowing marker nearly 2 kilometers away on the rocky hillside. "Range," the technician said calmly. 2,000 meters. "Moving target will activate in 10 seconds. Even I felt doubt at that distance. 2,000 meters was extreme, even by advanced military standards. Most species used assisted targeting systems or guided munitions at that range. Elias simply nodded once. He lifted the rifle and rested it on the edge of the workbench. No tripod. No stabilizing frame. Just wood against metal. Winds pushing east. He murmured quietly. I realized something strange then. He was not speaking to us. He was speaking to himself. The drone activated the moving target. A small metallic plate began sliding along. A rail across the rocky hillside, barely visible at that distance. Kareth watched with thinly hidden skepticism. "This is pointless," he said. "At that distance, your primitive ballistics." The rifle fired. The sound cracked across the plain like lightning. Half a second later, the moving plate shattered. The drone's monitoring screen flashed. Direct hit. Nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. Elias calmly worked the bolt, ejecting the empty casing with a metallic click. The brass shell bounced once on the concrete floor and rolled slowly until it stopped beside my boot. I looked down at it, then back up. Elias had already lowered the rifle. "That good enough?" he asked. Tovin's laughter had vanished. Kareth's eyes narrowed. Again. Elias shrugged slightly. The technician launched 2 more targets. Smaller ones. Faster. They moved in opposite directions. Elias lifted the rifle again. 2 shots. 2 impacts. Both targets exploded into fragments before. The sound of the second shot even finished echoing. No excitement. No celebration. No pride. Elias simply set the rifle down again. "That's about all I feel like doing today," he said. The alien delegation stood frozen. I watched the commander. Commander Rains was not surprised. He looked exactly like a man watching something predictable happen. Kareth slowly turned toward him. "This man," he said carefully, "is not civilian." "He is," Rains replied. "That level of precision requires military conditioning." Rains shook his head. "Elias hasn't worn a uniform in 12 years. I felt something shift in my chest. 12 years. 12 years since the war on the border. Systems. The same war whose classified archives had shown that rifle. I looked at Elias again. He had returned to the truck. Engine like none of this mattered. The rifle leaned against the wall beside him. Forgotten. Metal tools clinked softly as he resumed working. "How many like him?" I asked quietly. Rains glanced at me. "On Earth? Yes." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Hard to say exactly." That answer made my stomach tighten. "How many?" I repeated. Rains finally answered. "Millions." Tovin laughed again. But the sound was forced. "That is impossible." "Not really," Rains said calmly. "Humans grow up learning how to aim. Hunting, sport, competition, family traditions." He nodded toward the town outside. "Farmers, mechanics, teachers, bakers, most of them can shoot." Kareth's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You are telling me that a random civilian from a forgotten settlement can strike targets 2 kilometers away?" Rains nodded. "Pretty much." The marshal looked back at Elias. The mechanic was tightening a bolt inside the truck engine. He hummed quietly to himself while working. No tension. No alertness. Like a man who had already forgotten the demonstration. "That is not normal," Kareth said. "No," Rains agreed. Then his eyes hardened slightly. "It's human." The wind howled through the broken street outside. Dust rolled across the ground in slow waves. I looked again at the rifle leaning against the wall, and the memory returned stronger now. A battlefield recording. Alien command walkers collapsing, one after another. Officers dying without seeing the shooter. One single line in the report, repeating again and again. Unknown human marksman. Position unknown. My eyes slowly moved back to Elias. Civilian mechanic. Working on an engine, covered in grease, and suddenly, I understood something terrifying. The aliens had come to Earth expecting to measure an army. Instead, we had found something far worse. An entire species, where the soldiers did not always look like soldiers. And if this mechanic truly was ordinary, then I did not want to imagine what the extraordinary ones could do. The silence after the second shot stayed heavy. No one in our delegation moved. The broken pieces of the target still rolled down the distant hillside, glittering in the sun like falling sparks. Even the drone seemed unsure what to do next. Elias, however, had already returned to the truck. Metal tools tapped quietly. The sound of a wrench turning bolts filled the garage again. It was almost absurd how normal everything suddenly looked. A man fixing an engine, oil stains on the floor, wind pushing dust through the open door, as if the impossible thing we had just seen had never happened. High Marshal Kareth slowly stepped forward. "You are telling me," he said, each word carefully controlled, "that this individual is not even considered exceptional." Commander Rains leaned casually against the wall. "Elias is good," he said, "but no, he's not unique." Tovin gave a harsh laugh. "Your deception is transparent. That man is clearly a former military specialist." Rains shrugged. "He used to be." The garage went quiet again. Kareth's eyes sharpened instantly. "Used to be." Elias did not look up from the engine. The wrench continued turning. "Yes," Rains continued calmly. "He retired." "Snipers do not retire into mechanical labor," Kareth snapped. Elias finally spoke without looking back. "Most of us did." That sentence landed like a stone in water. Ripples spread through the room. I felt a strange tightening in my chest. Something about the way he said it sounded less like pride and more like exhaustion. Kareth folded his arms. "Explain." Elias tightened the final bolt and slid out from beneath the truck again. He sat on the floor for a moment, wiping his hands slowly. "Nothing to explain," he said. "War ended. People went home." Tovin gestured toward the rifle. "And your weapon?" Elias glanced at it. Old habit. The simplicity of the answer felt wrong. Wars do not end so cleanly. Not the ones I had studied. Not the border war. The memory pushed forward again. Destroyed command ships. Entire tactical networks collapsing. One sniper eliminating targets faster than battlefield AI could track. I took a step closer before realizing it. "Where did you serve?" I asked. Elias finally looked at me. Really looked this time. His eyes were darker than I had noticed earlier. Not angry. Not aggressive. Just tired. "Far away," he said. "That is not an answer." Good. The response surprised me enough that I almost laughed. But something in his face stopped me. He was not being rude. He was closing a door. Commander Rains cleared his throat. "The aliens are interested in the old war," he said. Elias's expression hardened slightly. "They shouldn't be." Kareth stepped closer. "Your species joined the consortium only recently. The border war archives remain incomplete. Many battle records were erased." Elias stood up slowly. "Maybe they were erased for a reason," Tovin scoffed. "Convenient." The mechanic turned toward the garage door and stared out at the empty desert town. "You ever been in a war where nobody knows who's winning?" he asked quietly. No one answered. He continued anyway. "Ships burning in orbit. Cities blacked out. Command chains breaking every hour. Messages getting shorter every day because there aren't enough people left to send them." His voice stayed calm. Too calm. That kind of war doesn't leave neat records. The wind howled outside again. Dust drifted across the road. I felt an uncomfortable chill crawl up my spine. "Your unit," I said carefully, "was involved in the final battles." Elias's shoulders stiffened. "You're digging in the wrong place," he said. Kareth stepped closer still. "Reports mention a human sniper responsible for disabling entire invasion commands." Elias turned his head slowly. "Reports say lots of things." They say that sniper eliminated 72 officers in one night. No response. They say he shut down an entire orbital strike chain. Still nothing. They say his position was never found. The mechanic finally looked directly at the marshal. Then he said something so quietly that for a moment I thought I had misheard. Good. Carrot's voice hardened. That sniper changed the outcome of the war. Elias leaned against the workbench. And you expect us to believe that the same individual now repairs truck engines in a dead settlement? The mechanic's mouth twitched slightly. Engines are easier. For the first time, Commander Rains actually laughed. A short, tired sound. He's not lying, the commander said. Kareth turned sharply toward him. You knew. Of course I knew. You deliberately brought us here. Yes. Why? Rains pushed away from the wall and stepped forward. His easy smile was gone now. You came here to measure our military strength, he said. That was the purpose of the visit. You expected soldiers in clean uniforms. That would be reasonable. Rains pointed toward Elias. This is also reasonable. Kareth frowned. I do not understand. Exactly. Rains walked toward the garage door and looked out across the quiet town. You're trying to measure humanity the way you measure other species. And it doesn't work. He gestured toward the empty street outside. Out there you'll find farmers, shopkeepers, mechanics, teachers, parents. Yes. And some of them used to end wars. The words landed heavily. I looked at Elias again. He had picked up the rifle and was carefully placing it back under the canvas sheet. The motion felt almost respectful, like burying something dangerous. Why stop? I asked suddenly. Both men looked at me. If your species has this level of capability, I continued, why stop using it? Elias answered first. Because we got tired of burying people. Rains nodded slowly. That's the part most species don't understand about humans. And what is that? Kareth asked. The commander turned toward us again. We're really good at war. His voice lowered slightly. But we hate it. That sentence felt strange, almost contradictory. A species that trains civilians to shoot like that and hates war? It made no sense. Before I could ask another question, something unexpected happened. The radio on the garage wall suddenly crackled. Static burst through the speaker. Then a voice came through, tense and urgent. Outpost command to Commander Rains. Immediate. Priority signal. The commander frowned and grabbed the radio. This is Rains. More static. Then the message arrived. Multiple unidentified ships entering outer system perimeter. The garage froze. Kareth's eyes widened slightly. What ships? He demanded. The radio voice answered. Unknown origin. A pause. Then the next sentence dropped like ice. They're not consortium vessels. The room went completely silent. Commander Rains slowly lowered the radio. Then he turned toward Elias. The mechanic was already pulling the canvas off the rifle again. His tired expression had changed. Not into anger, not into fear, into something colder, something older. Well, Elias said quietly, checking the weapon's bolt again. I guess the day's not over after all. The desert wind grew stronger as the sun dipped lower behind the mountains. Dust rolled through the streets of the small town, but the town was no longer quiet. Engines rumbled. Doors opened. Boots stepped onto dry ground. One by one, people came out of their homes. The baker from the corner shop walked into the street, carrying a long metal rifle case. A farmer drove a battered truck into position near the water tower. Two teenagers climbed onto a rooftop with calm, practiced movements. An elderly man sat on a porch and slowly assembled a weapon older than some governments. None of them looked frightened. None of them shouted. They simply moved into place like people who had done this before. Inside the garage, High Marshal Kareth watched through the doorway with growing disbelief. This is not possible, he whispered. Commander Rains crossed his arms. It's very possible. The marshal turned toward him. You are mobilizing. Civilians? No, Rains said quietly. They're mobilizing themselves. Outside, Elias walked slowly down the middle of the dusty road. His rifle rested across his shoulder. The setting sun painted long shadows behind him. He stopped near an old street sign and looked toward the horizon where the alien dropship had landed. Black smoke climbed into the sky from its engines. Kareth stepped outside the garage. You expect these people to fight a landing force? Elias did not turn around. They're not soldiers. That does not answer the question. The mechanic finally glanced back. No, he said calmly. It does. The marshal opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. Because in that moment, another sound reached the town. The distant roar of engines. Not trucks, not aircraft. Something heavier. Far out on the desert plain, the dropship's massive doors began to open. Dark shapes moved inside. Soldiers, dozens of them. Then hundreds. Their armor reflected the dying sunlight as they marched out onto the sand. A full invasion force. I felt my chest tighten. Your people will be slaughtered, I said quietly. Elias studied the distant figures through his scope. Maybe. The first alien armored unit began advancing toward the settlement. They moved in perfect formation. Disciplined, efficient, confident. After all, they believed they were approaching an undefended colony. Behind me, Kareth spoke again. Commander. Rains, this is madness. You cannot expect civilians to stand against trained soldiers. Rains watched the approaching army without any visible fear. You're still thinking about armies, he said. The first shot rang out before anyone else spoke. The sound echoed across the desert. One alien officer at the front of the formation collapsed instantly. The line of soldiers stopped. Confusion rippled through them. Elias calmly worked the bolt of his rifle. Another shot cracked through the air. A second officer dropped. Then a third. The alien formation began shifting, scanning the town for the shooter. But they could not see him. Elias had already moved. From the rooftop of the mechanic's garage, another rifle fired, and another from the water tower, then another from the far end of the street. Shots began appearing from every direction. Precise, controlled, silent between each echo. Alien soldiers fell one by one, as if invisible hands were pulling them down. Their formation broke. Officers shouted orders. Sensors scanned rooftops and windows. But every time they located one shooter, another appeared somewhere else. The town had become a maze of hidden angles. Kareth stared in horror. This is coordinated warfare. Rains nodded. Yep. You said they were civilians. They are. Across the street, the elderly man on the porch calmly fired. Another shot, and then took a sip from a metal cup. A teenager on the rooftop beside him adjusted her scope and eliminated a communications officer trying to retreat behind cover. A farmer resting against his truck fired twice and then returned to reloading shells with steady hands. No shouting, no chaos. Just quiet, practiced precision. The alien soldiers began retreating toward their dropship, but it was too late. Another rifle fired. The dropship's external sensor array exploded in a burst of sparks. Another shot disabled the forward weapons turret. Elias had climbed onto a small hill outside the town. He lay flat against the ground now, rifle steady, breathing slow. Through the scope, he tracked the final command officer running for cover. One clean shot. The officer dropped instantly. The remaining soldiers froze. For a moment, the battlefield went silent. Then the surviving invaders began running. Not advancing. Running. Retreating back toward the damaged dropship. Inside the town, rifles slowly lowered. Engines shut off. People stepped back from their positions as calmly as they had taken them. The baker returned inside her shop. The teenagers climbed down from the rooftop laughing quietly. The farmer closed the door of his truck and stretched his arms like a man finishing a long day of work. Kareth stared at the scene, speechless. This cannot be real. Commander Rains walked toward the road. It's real. What just happened here? Rains looked across the town where civilians were already returning to their normal lives. What always happens when someone invades Earth? Elias walked back into the street, carrying his rifle loosely in one hand. He looked tired again. like the fight had already drained the little energy he had. The alien dropship lifted into the sky moments later, burning hard as it retreated back toward orbit. The invasion had lasted less than 20 minutes. I stepped forward slowly. You defeated them, I said quietly. Elias shrugged. They'll think twice before coming back. Kareth stared at the town one last time. Hundreds of ordinary humans had already disappeared back into houses, shops, and garages. The streets looked peaceful again, like nothing had happened. The marshal turned to Commander Rains. I understand now. Rains raised an eyebrow. Understand what? Kareth took a slow breath. Why you told us to pick any civilian. The commander smiled slightly. Yeah. The marshal looked at Elias one last time. The mechanic had already placed the rifle back under the canvas. In his garage. He returned to the truck engine and picked up his wrench. Oil-stained hands. Grease on his cheek. Just a mechanic again. Kareth shook his head in disbelief. Your species hides its warriors in plain sight. Rains nodded. That's the safest place for them. The marshal looked toward the stars where the enemy fleet had already begun retreating from orbit. Then he said the final words quietly. If every civilian on Earth can fight like that. Rains finished the sentence. For him. Then imagine what happens when the soldiers show up.